From The Australian, here's what's on the front. I'm Kristen Amiot. It's Wednesday, December 4. Billionaire Richard White has told investors his decision to step down from the company he founded was a circuit breaker and necessary to protect WiseTech's future. It comes after details of the former chief executive's personal life were made public in court proceedings brought by a former lover. A man allegedly connected to the murders of two women in Collingwood almost 50 years ago touched down in Melbourne on Tuesday night. Perry Karoumblis was extradited from Rome, where he's been held in custody since September. He's expected to be formally charged in the coming days, but maintains he's innocent of the 1977 crime. Those stories are live right now at theaustralian.com.au. Who is Anthony Albanese really? In today's episode, The Australian's editor-at-large unpacks the PM's brilliant strategic mind and asks if he's the right person for the nation's top job. There were 76 bills on the table last week, the final sitting week of the parliamentary year. It was a hell of a mountain for the government to climb, but incredibly, 32 of them passed in a single day. It was during this torrent of legislation that Prime Minister Anthony Albanese got a big win.
In a world first, Australian children under 16 will be banned from social media as Parliament passes strict new laws. The move has attracted global attention, with the Albanese government rushing the bill.
Labor had every right to celebrate the social media ban's passage after making major concessions on key pieces of legislation at the 11th hour.
A bill aimed at cracking down on misinformation and disinformation on the internet has been pulled by the federal government.
The government's proposal to ban or restrict gambling advertising has also been delayed.
Still riding the high of that bipartisan victory, the PM shrewdly intervened in a dispute between Environment Minister Tanya Plibersek and Tasmanian salmon farmers who say her attempts to protect an endangered fish are threatening their livelihoods. The Australian's editor-at-large, Paul Kelly, says these past few weeks are telling. This is who Anthony Albanese is.
When Parliament broke last week, Anthony Albanese was in a mood of ebullience. He'd passed a lot of legislation through the Senate. Albanese is essentially a tactical Prime Minister. He's not a Prime Minister of transformation. He's not a Gough Whitlam, a Bob Hawke or a Paul Keating. He's very much the transactional leader. It's all about political tactics. It's all about maintaining his position at the election. Now, all this is well and good, but the point I'd make is we live in an age of transformation, whether we're talking now about the strategic outlook in the world from Xi Jinping to Donald Trump, whether we're talking about the economy, the challenge of inflation. This is an age of disruption. It's an age of profound change. It's an age of transformation. Just being a tactical leader is not going to be enough.
Labor's historic 2022 federal election win was followed by as good a run as any new government can hope to have. Australia's frosty relationship with China started to thaw. An ambitious 2030 emissions reductions target was legislated. The long-promised National Anti-Corruption Commission became a reality. But by the middle of this term, the vibe had shifted. Australia was plunged into a national housing crisis as inflation soared. An immigration detention debacle saw Labor scrambling to maintain voter confidence. And the Indigenous voice to Parliament was resoundingly defeated in a referendum following a confusing and ineffective Yes campaign captained by the Prime Minister.
My fellow Australians, at the outset, I want to say that while tonight's result is not one that I had hoped for, I absolutely respect the decision of the Australian people and the democratic process that has delivered it.
Well, we need a bolder leader. This is a time when we need bold policies. We need policies of transformation. Now, I know that's not easy. And I know that Anthony Albanese in particular has limits on what he can do. But he ran in 2022 on a policy of reassurance. That is, he didn't run on a radical agenda. He ran on a policy designed to deny Scott Morrison the capacity to run a negative campaign against him. So he remains committed to that policy of reassurance. It's a policy that he calls safe change. I understand this. And essentially what we've got here is the conflict between the politics and the times. The times demand bold policies from a Prime Minister, but the politics are based on caution. If you're a bold Prime Minister, that's high risk. The Australian public are very hypocritical. They say they want strong leadership, but they're divided about how you define strength. And if a Prime Minister starts delivering strong leadership, he's likely to run into trouble.
Anthony Albanese is widely expected to call an election for early 2025, though a promise made this week to bring Parliament back in February suggests it might not be in March as first thought.
So that means you are confirming that there will be a sitting of Parliament in February?
We fully expect to be sitting in February.
So does that give Anthony Albanese enough time to become the leader Australia needs right now?
He's not going to change. He's defined as a transactional and tactical Prime Minister. And he will use these skills and this approach when it comes to the election next year in 2025. So it's going to be a tight contest between Albanese and Dutton. But the challenge Peter Dutton faces as Liberal leader, it's essentially the same. Dutton has got to devise what's going to be an effective policy framework for himself. He hasn't done that. Peter Dutton has told us virtually nothing about the agenda that he's going to take to the election campaign. And all these people confidently telling us that Peter Dutton's got a very high chance of winning the election, I don't see how they can possibly make this claim, seeing we don't even know yet the fundamental policies that he's going to take to the election. And we know from what's happened in the past that there are great dangers here. Once an opposition leader has got to be defined by his policies, then it's a great opportunity for his opponents. This is what Albanese is waiting for. He's going to wage a savage, negative campaign against Peter Dutton. He's going to wage it on his character. He's going to wage it on his negativity, but he's going to wage it above all on his policies when Dutton's policies eventually come out. I think this is going to be very important. What will be the nature of Dutton's policies, and to what extent will they give Albanese the chance to really campaign against them?
Coming up, does the PM keep his friends close or his enemies closer? Anthony Albanese won the 2022 election by the slimmest of margins, and Labor has governed with just a one-seat majority in the House of Representatives ever since. They're staring down the barrel of a federal election at a time when incumbent governments around the world are being toppled by frustrated voters. It's rare for second-term governments to increase their majority, and that means if Labor gets up at the next election, it might need to form a coalition with the Greens if it wants to move forward with its legislative agenda. So how does the PM deal with the perception or the reality that he's in bed with an old foe, this close to an election?
The interesting thing about last week was most of the legislation which was passed in the Senate was passed on Labor-Green votes, and this was a win for Albanese. There's no question about that. He didn't offer many concessions to the Greens and they came on board. But it's quite interesting, isn't it? Because if in fact in the next Parliament there's going to be a minority Labor government, a minority Albanese government, then that will be a government that functions with a large degree of Green support. So in a sense, Albanese's success in the Parliament last week is a forerunner of what might be the future, a Labor-Green minority government as far as the Labor Party is concerned. Dutton will campaign on this, there's no question about that at all, He's basically going to say the future is between a coalition government that you know and an experimental Labor, Green, Teal government. What Albanese will argue in turn is what happened last week proves that he can dictate terms to the Greens, that he won't be beholden to the Greens when he's dealing with them. He'll be a strong leader, and the fact that he was able to successfully dictate terms to the Greens on that legislation last week will be put forward by Albanese as an example of what he can do. If Albanese is forced into minority government, he won't do what Julia Gillard did. If he's to get a commission from the Governor-General, only one thing counts. That is, he doesn't have to do a deal with the Greens. All he's got to do to get a commission from the Governor-General is to have the confidence of the Parliament. So I think in that sense, Albanese, who lived through the Gillard experience, will know that he's in a strong position when it comes to that question of confidence, provided he's got more seats in the Parliament than Dutton.
Just lastly, Paul, the Greens did unexpectedly well at the 2022 election thanks to some savvy manoeuvres on the campaign trail. What are their prospects coming into 2025, do you think, and what does that mean for Anthony Albanese?
This, I think, is a difficult question because the Greens have made a number of mistakes, but they've also exploited a number of opportunities. If we look at housing, for example, certainly the Greens have been running on housing for the last few years in order to build up their support among renters, among young people. And so if one just looks at that, you might suspect that the Greens are in a good position to increase their vote. But if you look in a broader sense, the Greens have become a far more radical party, and particularly when it comes to the conflict in the Middle East. So that may well be undermining them in the electorate. And the fact that last week they came on board to support a lot of the legislation they'd previously been opposing suggests that the Greens themselves are concerned about their standing in the electorate. So it's hard to tell at this stage how they'll perform. There are opportunities and negatives for them in terms of their performance in recent times.
Paul Kelly is The Australian's editor-at-large. You can read his column right now at theaustralian.com.au.